Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming to our panel. Ooh, they came from QA. My name is Kevin Schultz. I'm the community manager here at Firaxis Games, and we're going to do a little panel here that's going to talk about QA in a general sense, how Firaxis kind of operates in QA, and we all started from QA and have gone to pretty cool positions in the studio, and how that's a possible thing just for anybody to do. Just quick introductions. This is Barry Caudill, the Director of Gameplay Development, also our manager of the QA department, and Lena Brenk, who, if you've been following Beyond Earth coverage, you've probably seen her face on some videos. She's the lead producer for the game. I'll let them talk in just a second, but since I have such a massive ego, I'm going to tell you all my story first. Well, before we do that, a couple questions. Who here, just in a very general sense, who here is interested in working in the games industry? Just, you think it'd be a cool thing to do? Everyone, good. That'd be weird if you didn't raise your hand. But so everyone that raised their hands, who here thinks that they could, starting Monday, you could work at your favorite studio, working on their latest and greatest game with the skill sets you have now, very realistically? Who here thinks they could start working? Stop it. So not as many hands, couple. That's where I started. Growing up, I played games my whole life, went to school for writing and sociology, but I never really focused on a skill that went directly into designing games or something that would put me in a game studio. But what I did do was some internships at a game journalist site, media production studio, and my senior year, Barry Caudill and another former Firaxian came in and did a little talk, and I got connected with them. And despite the fact that I didn't really have any coding skills or art skills, I got into a QA position through Barry and worked that for a couple years. My position now is the community manager. That position opened up. I applied for that. And so it's just a very natural progression. So it's a very, you can get into the studio, you can get into studios without having to, I guess, get into all those deep skills. But so that's my somewhat interesting story. Not really. But these guys got better ones if you want to. You do.
Okay, I guess I'm next. So yes, I started in QA. I actually went to school for architecture, and then I played games for, most of my life. From the moment my dad brought home a PC, I played games. And so architecture, loved it, but maybe career-wise, not quite the thing. So I looked into games, and I started as a German localization tester, first at Nintendo. And then I went to 2K in London and worked in their localization QA department for 3 years. And then I met Barry. And so I worked on Civilization 5 as well, back in the localization QA department as the lead localization tester back then. Then I was the supervisor for a little while. And so with working with Civ 5 already, I already knew that the Firaxis guys were pretty awesome and wanted to see if there wasn't any chance of them maybe needing somebody with my skill set. And then I actually managed to get over here, move to Baltimore, beautiful Baltimore, and become an associate producer on the Civilization games. So I started with Gods and Kings as associate producer, and then associate producer on Brave New World, and lead producer on Sid Meier's Ace Patrol, and then lead producer on Civilization Beyond Earth. And that's where we're at right now.
So apparently knowing me is the key to the industry.
Yeah.
I'll have a line up over here. You guys can come get me later. I completely backed into the industry in 1998. I was a musician full time, and I really wanted something more structured. And I just literally opened up the newspaper, and it said Microprose was looking for testers. And I went in there, and they said, "Do you know how to play Civilization?" I said, "I play Civilization all the time." And they basically said, "When can you start?" So I started there. I was at Microprose for 4 years, although the last year of it, I spent the entire year on site at Firaxis helping test Civ 3. And at the end of that time, Microprose had been bought by several studios. We were bought by Hasbro Interactive, and then that was bought by Infogrames, and they became Atari. And right around that time, they just completely closed our QA department. And so I was able to slide over to Firaxis as the QA manager of a department of 0. I was the manager of no one, maybe myself, but I'm very unmanageable. So I did that for a little bit for the Civ 3 expansion packs, and then I got sort of my big break when Sid asked me to be his producer for Pirates. And from there, I became the senior producer for Civ 4. Then I was the producer and executive producer for Civ Revolution. I stayed executive producer for a few years before finally moving into my current role, which is director of gameplay development, which generally has me sitting in an ivory tower and pointing at things a lot, mostly. So that's how I got here.
All right, so what is QA? I'm sure many of you know, but QA, bug testing, there's also different kinds of QA, and that's what we're going to kind of go into in a little bit. But in a very general sense, open work environment, a little rowdy sometimes. But it's
Depending on where you work, though, it can be quite different in different companies.
Sure, yeah. I guess it seems like to be typically like an open environment, very collaborative, very collective. It is not a place to be exclusive. You want to be inclusive. It's a team effort. I think you told me this, but this is probably something everybody says, but QA is not about so much finding the bugs, but finding the fun in a game.
Definitely at the developer level, for sure.
And then database management.
Yeah, there's a lot of that.
Always database management. But there are different kinds of QA. There's publisher, there's developer, there's multiple, I guess, departments in publisher QA that Lena's going to go into. But just the broad strokes is the publisher QA is really like a more, they're the guys that when they find one bug, they're kind of thinking like, okay, well, there's 9 other languages that this game is in. Here's 10 more bugs. The developer is that more feedback-driven, balance-driven, finding the fun-driven kind of QA. But despite the different goals of these, or immediate, I guess I should say, objectives, the overall goal is the same, is to ship a great game. And so communication is a huge thing, and that can sometimes be challenging when your publishers across the country. In California, we're based out here, so that's just, you can imagine the difficulties, but the success that we've had. We've got some good ways of communicating put together, but let's go into some of those things. Lena, do you want to take?
Yeah, so I worked in localization QA, as mentioned, at the 2K Games localization QA. So that's part of publishing QA. Publishing QA is really a lot about gatekeeping and making sure no crashes, no hard bugs are in the game. They come in a little later than development QA. It's not so much about feedback about how fun this feature is. It's more about, so does it work? Will it work on this PC and this PC and this PC and different setups? And for localization QA specifically, it's providing native speakers for all the different languages in which we are going to ship the game. And so we have, for example, 2K QA has German testers and French testers, Italian testers, Spanish testers, Chinese testers, Korean testers, and so in different offices all over the world. And it's really important to be a native speaker in localization QA, obviously, because you can't quite pick up on all the small, subtle things if you're not a native speaker. But you obviously also need to be fluent in English, because communication is a big part of QA. So communicating with the developers and really getting across what the problem is, that isn't always easy, because sometimes those problems are pretty subtle and culturally driven. And so getting that across, you need really good fluency in English. So a lot of the localization QA guys speak at least those 2 languages. Sometimes they are not necessarily, a lot of the backgrounds actually are in linguists or translators or that really love games and want to do something with games, but use their skills. So they go into either localization, which is translation of the games, or localization QA. So what they do, it's testing linguistic quality of the written and spoken word, but also the cultural fit. One key difference between localization QA and other publishing QA, like the functionality QA, for example, which is also a part of publishing QA, is that localization QA often gets to fix a lot of bugs themselves. So if you find a spelling mistake, you usually have access to the text files in some way. They're usually in a database somewhere. And so you can go in and find that text in that database, and then you just fix it. And then when we get a heads up that bugs have been fixed, we just pull all the text from the database and implement it into the game. So a lot of the localization testers actually do have access to some part of the game itself and can fix stuff directly. Of course, not all bugs are fixable on that end. There's a lot of things in localization QA, like, for example, German has a reputation for having really long words. And it's kind of true, although it's not only German. English, like from my perspective, English has a reputation for having really short words. When an UI engineer does a UI, so the interface, and provides a box, and the box is really small because OK is so small, it's like it fits everywhere, and then it needs to be translated into 10 other languages. Most other languages will need more than 2 characters to convey the meaning. So things like that, of course, the localization QA department can't fix, so they write up a bug, and then the UI engineer goes in and makes the box bigger, unless he's been through this 2 or 3 times already on previous projects and has thought of that when he did the interface. That's localization QA,
cool.
I think.
Yeah, I love the fact that fixing your own bugs, that seems like a dream.
It seems like a dream, but it's also, you're like, you know, sometimes QA testers can be quite mischievous. And you're like, uh-oh. So.
Okay. So developer QA, that's where Barry and I kind of focused in on. The great thing about it is we're in the house with the engineers, we're with the teams. So there's a very direct feed. If there's a gigantic problem going on in the game, you can go right to the guy and tell them first. And that's usually what you want to do even before you write the bug, or at least in my experience. I remember I loved finding horrible things in the last of Sid's projects I worked on, because that meant I got to go to his office and just talk to him for a few minutes. Like, hey, now that we've talked about this game-ending crash. But you get to, it also helps you kind of further your career if you get to develop those relationships with those engineers. They do a lot of, they'll teach you a lot. I've learned a lot from them. It also gave me an opportunity to do a lot of different things outside of just kind of bug testing. And I know at our studio, we open up our sort of our proto voices in our games to the studio. So I got to do a lot of voice acting. Yeah. I found out I make a pretty good robot, but not a good human.
Apparently, I was the first Dr. Valen.
You're the only Dr. Valen in my mind.
So scratch audio, that was fun, that's true.
So what else? We got, I think we mentioned, we touched on it before, that it's more focused on balance and fun. So it gives us this almost creative opportunity in QA to write out feedback and tell Jake or Ananda or Sid or anyone who's working on the various designers of the Civ projects what we think and what we think should be changed in the game, and we can see those changes sometimes in the very next day in our different iterations. So I found it to be a very personal and more, I guess, creative outlet than I was originally expecting going into the job.
It's also, I mean, the designers, when they implement a new feature, they just walk over to the QA room and are like, so we implemented this, what do you think? Like, yay, nay? Like,
Yeah, yeah. I remember.
How's it looking, and like how much does it break the game? Like how bad a mistake was it really to implement this late or something?
Yeah.
So you're the first test of how feasible it actually is to change things when it's late in the process.
Yeah, I remember at one point the terror missions were brutal in XCOM. And I remember Jake coming in and just sitting down with us and asking us, like, what do you all think? And we just told him, we're getting murdered. We can't get past it. Like, this needs to be toned down.
Yeah, we had that in BE as well.
Yeah.
Where it was like, after days, our lead tester was like, yes, something's up with the siege worms. They wreck our cities left and right. It turned out that David had, like, just for debug, just for testing purposes, put up the aggressiveness of siege worms by, like, I think 1,000% or something, just to try a very specific thing out, and had forgotten to put it back.
Yeah.
But our QA guys, of course, they play the game a lot, so they are pretty good at playing this game. So they're like, well, it's gotten a bit harder, but like, no, we can't get past 100. Oh, it's dying. So I was like, oh yeah.
Yeah. Would you like to talk about the history of Firaxis, since you've been with us for so long?
Been around for a little bit. I was employee number 32 originally, but so at Microprose, when I first started in QA, it was very much like the Wild West. I mean, we had 30-some testers at that time, and we were a hybrid because we had just been bought by Hasbro Interactive, so we were a hybrid developer and publisher QA. So that meant that we got to test really cool stuff, you know, like we're doing Civ 2 multiplayer gold, Civ 2 test of time, we were doing Gunship, you know, we were doing Falcon 4.0, we were doing all these really cool things. And then we would turn around and test this just mind-numbing, horrible stuff like, you know, Chutes and Ladders or Candyland Adventures 2 or something like that, you know. And me, the person that I was at the time, I was so interested in trying to be conscientious and you know, make a good impression that because I didn't complain, I was the guy that ended up playing these horrible games for a really long time. Just
that's a good skill to learn.
It is, but you'll suffer in the long run.
And you guys, you know, you developer QA guys are really lucky because we only make amazing games at Firaxis, right? But if you work for a publisher, it's like a huge range of games, and some are just really not your genre. Like, I'm not a huge sports games person, just never quite warmed up to it, or children's games. Like, lots of children's games. You play them 8 hours a day.
That's, I think, something we should say is that Firaxis QA, that's, I think, the dream in terms of, like, game testing, because, like, people already play Civ and XCOM for hundreds and thousands of hours. Like, okay, I can still go in and play XCOM, even though I've beaten it 1,000,000 times over and have over 1,000 hours in my Steam, like, just good replayable games. So I feel blessed in that regard.
You're so lucky.
Yeah.
So back in those days at Microprose, things were really, it was very early in the process, and so we had these games, you know, that we were testing, but we did not have a good system for handling the bugs and stuff like that. We used to use Lotus Notes was our bug tracker. Wait, I'm not done. So we didn't have enough licenses for everybody to get into Lotus Notes. So you would have to write everybody besides the leads would have to write their bugs as a text and then send the text to the lead, who would then put the bugs in, and then later the lead would spit all the bugs out. When you had to go back and check to make sure they're fixed, they would spit this text file back out and say, okay, now here's your bugs, you know. So I would just sit there with a pad of paper and I would just be writing, and then, you know, then I'd have to spend, you know, a certain amount of time typing it up. Now we use a lot more cool tools. You know, one of the things that I did when I first started Firaxis was start getting them while we were still independent, to use Test Track Pro as a bug tracker, which is a great database. You know, it works really, really well for that stuff. And then later, when I was the executive producer, I started us using Handsoft, ostensibly to both be a task tracker and a bug tracker. But then once we were purchased by Take-Two, and they were using Test Track, it didn't really make sense for us to use the bug tracking in Handsoft anymore, because eventually it was all going to have to get into Test Track anyway. So we sort of came full circle on that. But nowadays, you know, things are a lot more organized. We have test plans are a lot more involved. We get a lot of, amazing stuff that comes down from the 2K QA guys. They handle all of the, they do the test plan, they do all of the checklists and all that kind of stuff, which is great because, and I'm not, one of the things I want to point out is I'm not trying to say that only the people at Firaxis are the guys test and balance and finding the fun. That's completely open. We like to get feedback from anywhere that we can get feedback, and so we've gotten great ideas, from 2K QA over the years, and we've gotten great feedback. It's just that the initial, as Lena said, the function of publisher QA is to be more of a gatekeeper, more about certification, more about making sure that this game is really ready to ship. And the purpose of our developer QA is as Kevin said, is to find the fun, find the balance, but also to have a very immediate interplay with the people on the team. A lot of the teams at Firaxis have moved to Scrum, which is a development methodology. And one of the tenets of Scrum is that there's supposed to be a QA person in every meeting. If we didn't have QA at Firaxis, we wouldn't be able to do that. And it would actually not be Scrum anymore. If anybody's a developer and knows what Scrum is, there's a lot of people that do modified, quote unquote modified Scrum, and my contention is always that's not Scrum then, it's something else. So we try to, we're trying to make sure that we stick to the letter of that so that we get the benefit of using that methodology.
And it's interesting the way you describe, for example, your first job at Microprose. When I applied at 2K, I was like, well, I'm a huge PC player. And they're like, okay, let us test your skills. Here's a gamepad, play The Darkness. Oh. I'm not a console player. Now a bit more than I have been, but it's quite tricky when you're used to shooters with a mouse and a keyboard, suddenly go with a gamepad. But I had to get through that first level for them to believe me that I actually, so the tests have gotten harder, I believe, and just telling them that I play Civilization didn't quite make it when I applied.
Just a matter of years, and Civilization's not good enough.
I hope that wouldn't be true, that it's Civilization, but yes, so.
I think a good home test that you can take home is if writing a bug, just in your head, think about like, what are the steps to making like a peanut butter and jelly sandwich? And then you think it's just like, oh, I just put bread and I put peanut butter on the bread. It's like, well, no, you got to get the knife that's in the drawer. You got to take the top off the peanut butter. And if you can kind of go through that list, that's kind of like a quick and easy version of
the More process. Importantly, if you always get to the point where you're eating your peanut butter sandwich and there's something wrong with it, you'd be able to go back and say, where did I didn't take the lid off, so the knife never got in. So I really wasn't spreading anything, because that's the deal, like just finding the bug, just saying like, oh, it crashed, is not good enough. It's doesn't help anybody. You can't go to a programmer and just say, hey, it crashed. Good luck. You have to be able to go back and analyze it and say, and not just say, well, it happened when I hit this button, because that may not be it. You load the save up, you hit that button again, oh, it didn't crash. Oh, let me load two saves earlier. Okay, I remember I did this, and then I had diplomacy, and then this came up, and then I hit this button, and then you can go back and do that again. And basically in QA, it's if you can make it happen 3 times in a row, that's 100%. And we call that 100%. We send it off to the programmer and say it's 100%, and then of course they say no, I can't reproduce. So.
Cool. All right. So how does QA lead to the rest of the industry? So there are different paths through QA, and it depends on where you're at. I've read before. I don't know if these are true facts, but I read in I think a Gamma Sutra article that BioWare has like a specialty positions in QA that you can move into that are a little more focused on like harder skills, technical skills. If anyone's seen the very public Valve employee handbook, in there it describes how they have no hierarchy structure, I believe. So I guess a QA person is on the same level as the CEO, as Gabe Newell himself, but I don't know if that's actually true. It's very much a foot in the door position. That's how I guess my approach for it was. I didn't have the skills to move into programming. I can't draw a circle. That's that thing, right? And so for me, it was a good way to get into doing something I wanted to do, but didn't necessarily know what I could do. And Firaxis gave me a lot of opportunities to figure that out, and I'm doing a job that I think is so much cooler than I could have ever imagined myself having a job in the industry. It's also, this area is fantastic for just networking, and we have a lot of studios out here. It's kind of weird. You wouldn't expect this area to be so heavy and dense. Right across the street is ZeniMax. But we have a very open community. We have the IGDA, which is just composed of people from every studio. They all go and just get together and have some beers and talk game development. So we don't have any direct competition, or it's not a competitive environment. It's a very open and supportive area to be in.
Yeah, I mean, one thing about QA is, you know, if you get into it, there's a couple great things about it. One is that maybe you don't know where you fit in the industry. I didn't, when I got into QA, I didn't know where I fit in the industry. It wasn't until I was there and watching what people did and seeing how my skill set might match up with some of those things. And so I identified fairly early on that I did have, some design potential, but I had a lot of production potential, and so, for me, I wouldn't have even, coming in from outside, I wouldn't have even known that was a place that I could go. And, but also it's a great place, once you've identified what you want to do, there's a lot of opportunities to do that thing and prove yourself. We've out of QA at Firaxis, we've moved a lot of people into production positions. We've moved several people into writing positions. We've moved people into design positions, and it's mostly because they're there, they're working, they're in the environment, and they see, okay, I want to do that thing, and then it comes up. How many QA people were in writing for Beyond Earth? There's at least 4 in the credits, I think. Right?
So, yeah.
You get a chance. So now you even, not only are you getting a chance to do it, but you get a writing credit in the game. If something were to happen, you can go someplace else and say, look, I did this thing. It's a great way to get started.
All right. So Firaxis does a number of interesting things to help out its QA department. The first point is very relevant to me is we promote promotion from within. And so when my position opened up, the QA department was the first to know before I think it went anywhere else. And so that was very much about keeping our we're very family oriented. I think that's what I'm trying to say. Opportunities to grow. We've got an open door policy, so you can go and talk to Jake, you can talk to Sid, you can talk to our CEO, Steve Martin, at any point. You've probably heard stories about how Jake would go into Sid's office and they would just chat it out on his green couch. We have tools on the network that are open and free to use. I'm learning some Photoshop skills as we speak.
That circle thing, huh?
The circle?
Working on the circle thing?
It's a tool. I heard it's a tool.
All you do is just click the mouse once and drag it. It's great. We have a Firaxis U, which is modeled after, I think Pixar does this kind of thing where someone at the studio will give a quick little lesson on a topic of their interest. And so usually the Firaxis U ones are focused on some sort of gaming technique. And those have always been pretty interesting. There's always free pizza as well, which is the reason to go to them.
Also, we're getting ready. It hasn't been an annual event, but in November, we're going to have the 3rd not-so-annual Firaxis Game Jam, which is another way where it's a straight-up weekend game jam. It's not like the Amnesia Fortnite or things like that, because we don't necessarily expect that those ideas will go someplace necessarily, because we're pretty full for the next few years. But what we do hope for is that it's a great chance for people to recharge their batteries, their creative batteries, and get in there and figure stuff out. And there's something to be said for taking a project, even in a very short period of time, taking it from its beginning to a natural end, and all the decisions you have to make to get to that point. So that's another way that you can show your stuff. We have people from QA that are going to be on teams. We have people from audio that are going to try programming. We have it's a chance to sort of do try something new and show what you can do.
So just a little quick shout out. These are the lovely, beautiful faces of our current QA department. I should say technically they're the faces of the QA department. These pictures are probably 2 years old at this point. I did not search too hard on their Facebook pages. They are doing wonderful, great things. A lot of them are here today, so please say hello to all of them. I think, like you guys were saying, that they are, you'll find them not just in the QA credits of our games, but you're going to find them throughout the different credits, so in the writing portion of Beyond Earth. So memorize all these names and look out for them out there. All right, so what gets you noticed? So both of you have hired QA people in your respective positions. What did you guys look for?
So generally, yes, in localization QA, language skills are the first big threshold. So native speaker and English language skills were important. But beyond that, also a certain methodology or methodical approach to bugs, a certain organization, like organized people tend to fare well at finding bugs and reporting them appropriately. Yes, but it was localization, so the language thing kind of was big first on the list.
Yeah, I mean, communication, when you're in a software development team, communication is a big deal, and it's really important for QA people because basically you're going to tell somebody, some artist or some programmer, you're going to tell somebody that their baby is ugly. And nobody wants to hear that their baby is ugly, you know? And so you have to find nice ways to be like, well, it's really great the way that the eye that's off on the side of his head still kind of looks at me when I'm, you know. So you have to figure out, how can I explain to this person that this thing that they just spent 20 hours on or something like that is actually, even though I'm saying that there's a bug, I'm not saying that everything that they've done is worthless. And it's really about communication. It's about not being antagonistic and not getting frustrated and then going to the person while you're completely frustrated to say, like, I hate you, what you just did. You really have to take a breath and move on. And that, I guess, the patience thing comes into that. I talked about the analytics too, but patience is a thing, not just on a day-to-day basis with your bugs or whatever, but patience is something that if you're going to be in QA, I get a lot of resumes from people that are, I'm really a game designer and I went to school for this, or I'm really an artist, but you're looking for a QA person, so okay, I'll do that, and that's fine. I don't mind that at all. What I need though when I'm hiring that person is I need them to be able to be happy and productive in that job for as long as it takes to get noticed to move to something else. What I can't have is somebody that says, yeah, I'm going to be your QA guy, and the second they walk in the door, they're like, look at my art, look at my art, look at my art, and that just isn't going to work. We have a very limited team. We only have 8 full-time testers back there, and we have, upwards of 4 projects that, sometimes going on at the same time. So they really have to pull their weight. And if they're too busy trying to do something else, it's not good for the department. It's not good for the company. Ultimately, that's not good for 2K or Take-Two either.
And it's a good point. I think every one of us, it took a little bit to get it. That sounds wrong. Let me not say that way. To get out of QA. No. So to advance beyond QA, it just takes a little bit. And in QA, you learn a lot too. So it takes some time to actually become a really good tester. Even if you're a really good player, you're probably not a very good tester just from the first day. It takes a few skills you need to learn first. So it's not like, I'm here now what's the next job? It takes a little. So patience is surely something needed. And
there are ways to get noticed. If you were at Publisher QA or something like that, there are ways to move up and stay in QA. There's nothing wrong with that whatsoever, because if that's the kind of thing that you like, if you don't think to yourself, well, I really want to go be a producer or a writer or whatever, there are ways to get noticed and work your way up the ranks, and maybe you're managing multiple projects now, or maybe you've moved up into a director level position, in QA. There's opportunities there. They're just as readily available as they are anywhere else. So it's there's absolutely nothing wrong with working your way up that ladder as well, as opposed to getting out. We're out because that's what we felt like we had a place separate from there, but we could have just as easily had a place in QA. I think any of us.
All right, so QA, I guess, maybe we're giving the wrong impression. It's not about the skills to take you out of QA, but there are lots that I think we all learned while we were in QA that we took into our next job. I know for me personally, QA is filled with super fans, and that's very relevant to me in my position is learning how to separate the fandom from the feedback. So people who are very passionate about the games, that's great, and that's learning to talk to them is one thing, but figuring out what they're trying to say is a completely different thing. They could be saying that they think I think this is Tim Schafer's example. I'm stealing. Sorry. He said that someone might find a part of the game boring, but that might actually be because the music is too short and the loop is too short and it's playing too often. So there's a lot of getting through that and communicating with the rest of QA where we're kind of bouncing ideas back and forth over what a system should and shouldn't be. I think that helped me in my position here where I'm constantly on our forums looking out for feedback and sentiment on our games, which I take back to our teams and our designers and hopefully influence our games for the better. But how about you guys?
Well, for me, as a producer specifically, I learned a lot about the processes at the publisher, which is very valuable because I understand, like, when they request certain things, why they request them, and why certain things are important to the publisher that might not be as naturally important to the development studio. So it's very easy for me to work with the publishers, with the guys on the publishing side, which is good for a producer because you do that all the time. But also just things of methodically approaching certain problems. My guys know that sometimes they will get an email from me saying, like, I just checked the game out and I ran into this crash, and here's the save file, and here's the log files, and here's the... So just because my QA roots, I will always include all the relevant info I can dig up to deliver to them so they have somewhere to start, things like that that make it easier for them. I basically learned at QA, it doesn't take me long to get that stuff together because I've done it for years. Yeah, and digging to get to the root of problems is something that's part of the producer's job. Like, deal with problems, ideally before they really crop up and become big problems. So figuring out, like, something's going on, something's going on, like the team is getting maybe a bit edgy, something's up, so you start digging and figure out what is going on, and then you start attacking the problem.
I have all these cool words on here like wisdom and scale and confidence, and frankly, I am too old to remember what I said that day, but I'm sure it was really deep. But I mean, I think that the one thing I did kind of allude to is that there's always that saying, nobody wants to know how sausage is made. But I think when you're in QA, you kind of really get very deep into the how sausage is made thing, but you end up still loving sausage anyway. So there's my analogy. Take that, run with that.
That's the wisdom part.
Yeah. All right, and so we're gonna end it here. But before we do, these are the other lovely people at Firaxis Games who started in QA, and you can see that they've moved on to all sorts of positions. A few producers in there. Rex Martin doesn't really do the Facebook thing, so that's his picture from Ace Patrol, if any of you have played it.
It's surprisingly accurate.
Yeah, it is. But if anyone has any questions, we're going to be around just hanging out, so feel free to come in and talk to us. I hope you enjoyed the panel. I hope you learned a thing or two about QA. Thank you so much for listening. It was great having you.